In the words of all words is some combination of vowels and consonants. Anonymous 1990. Or was it a Don Imus that said that? Alberto Penelope Einstein, you may have heard of him, once sagged over a French fry station at his hometown fast food hamburger joint, his pores no doubt saturated in frying oil, wondering if this was all his future entailed, as time likely ran slower for him while earning that minimal wage. Any awareness of those dormant though eventual contributions laying across his future horizon were at the time clouded by impatient, hungry motorists honking their horns while greedily waiting for their combo meals. Contributing to his melancholy was a recent disastrous showing as the invited host for a local Who's Who in the Weimar Awards ceremony. A misplaced comment which described his personal views on antimicrobial diligence set the evening's tone. He said, quote, "The danger of the germ anyone should see is that it exists." End quote. He uncomfortably stumbled over his words, stubbornly spoken in broken English, throughout the affair. This preceding tryst with the drive-through attendant, ripe with exploration and fry oil, and haphazardly coming to fruition on an elevator, delayed him getting his much-needed eye exam by 2 crucial hours. Partially as a consequence, and perhaps the worst of all of his failings over the course of that night, he lost control of his balance at one point due to slippery soles and just dilated eyes, resulted in him acquiescing to gravity and falling off stage knees first into the Kaiser's groin region, causing the latter to first fall backwards out of his chair and then curl up into the fetal position for several minutes. The square MC and rudderless fast food worker, so deflated and constitutionally withdrawn about his lot in life, could easily have continued on that hopeless path of cooking thin strips of potatoes in that hot oil and perhaps eventually one day have been elevated to assistant manager. But alas, not a lad, yes thou of the fairer sex, she who wore the trappings of an elitist debutante, was the final straw on that camel's sack. She stormed into that restaurant looking for the worker who had messed up her order, and shoving her way through to the kitchen area, she verbally and physically assaulted poor Al. While disassociating himself from that irate customer's diatribe, the Fraulein who had not wanted salt on her proverbial fries, he performed a thought experiment. At his moment of supreme despair, he realized the answer to an eternal question which had for a few years provoked mild, transient anxiety in both man and yeast. Relativity. In other words, there are 2 syllables, always. Other. Mr. Einstein, or as his wife called him, Big Mr. E, ended up proving how your relatives, both dead and alive, provide real-time feedback that certain creatures' features are actually not passed on to their offspring. Consider the variability between faces and feces, as well as tongue color, hair length, preference for Bert versus aversion to Ernie, etc. Open Source Al, as his countless lovers phonetically called him, cared not for profit nor recognition because he only desired to improve society. Such altruism. He revealed how physical features, rather than being passed along from generation to generation through hereditary means, are due to environmental pressures which alter the surrounding DNA as it interacts with its environment. For example, if there is a tree too tall for a giraffe to eat the leaves off of, then the leaf DNA will respond by sending growth signals to the neck area of the giraffe. So, a son is not similar looking to his daddy because of traits passed down, but because of them habitating in the same environment. Alberto had been traveling down a one-way street, put another way, before that way, and he now was on a two-way street. Well, some of you likely have had surprise and perhaps unpleasant encounters with an owl. After all, those persons' ideas which lead to jarring flashes of insight and the raising of civilization's eyebrows tend to be initially painful. Society did benefit from this man. 2 gregarious brothers without a square foot of land to call their own, Orville and Wilbur de Haviland of Kitty Falls, West Virginia, once stood coinless outside of a J.C. Penney's department store, unsure if they had the right stuff to work as clothiers. Without any direction, they spent their days on the couch, watching episodes of Good Times. Though, ironically, Good Times were something they didn't know of. But 2 months later, after a drug-fueled night of partying and debauchery, an epiphany struck them as they lay in a pool of their own construction. In the span of 5 minutes, they went from lazily tanning while floating in their inflatable chairs to feverishly sketching out their idea with paper and pen. In 1 week, they spirited in the jet age with their novel, quirky invention of the flying bus, and were soon off chasing tornadoes from across the U.S. to the enjoyment of millions. You see, most of you here tonight, Helen Keller, however, the only child of a narcissistic circus clown and his bed-confined part-time lover, could do neither. But within hours of her lowest point, during her Sweet 16 karaoke birthday party in which her daddy was the paid entertainment, she experienced an epiphany so powerful that it resulted in her traveling solo one day across the globe in her home-built aeroplane, itself constructed in just a few spare minutes and held together with molasses, twigs, some rocks, and many leaves. At least for the obscure subset of aviation enthusiasts, this was technically an accomplishment. I have grown to loathe the use of non sequiturs in any capacity, not just inside home-built plain stories. Francis Tickle, a socially awkward and unassuming uncle who had been alienated by his entire family, included via restraining orders for reasons disclosed, was dishonorably discharged from the Army before that. Private Tickle had many young nephews and nieces while awkwardly aging in the early 1970s. He was once a full-time mall Santa Claus without benefits until one night a light bulb went off. His power had been turned off due to his failure to pay the electricity bill. Now, at last seeing the snake in the grass, this was his true lowest point. But in just 2 long weeks, he would be credited with introducing the world to the familiar tickle that we all now know of so intimately, including the non-consensual tickling encounters that older siblings have assumed ownership of. Such tickling, in fact, owes direct homage to Mr. Tickle. Well, things began to really change for Uncle Francis when he could negotiate through life's variety of impasses using that persuasive tickle torture. His power was quickly turned back on as the ambushed serviceman, exasperated and teary-eyed on the floor, had effectively no other choice. Perhaps if Sir Neville Chamberlain had had the tickle in his negotiations arsenal, we would have had peace for our time.